So if you build production systems for a living, you you wouldn't dream of deploying code without Git.
Oh, absolutely not.
Right. Like, it's unthinkable.
Yeah.
You wouldn't store your application's state in some, I don't know, opaque zip file that has to be unpacked and repacked every single time a service needs to read a variable.
Yeah, that would be an engineering nightmare.
Exactly. You build on structured data, you demand clean diffs, and you rely on immutable audit logs.
Right.
But then when you actually look at the knowledge layer of the Fortune 500, like the multi-million-dollar vendor contracts, the regulatory filings, all of that.
It's a complete opposite.
It is. It's the exact opposite. We see the enterprise running on this massive load-bearing pile of technical debt.
And that debt is defined entirely by binary office formats from the 1990s.
Yeah. Which brings us to our mission for this deep dive. We're unpacking a highly confidential internal founder strategy memo.
From April 2026.
Right, April 2026. And this is for a startup called MarkdownOffice.
And I think we need to set the stakes right away. Because this isn't just about, launching another AI writing assistant.
Well, the text editor, yeah.
Exactly. It's an infrastructure play. The memo outlines a 10-year vision to displace proprietary document formats the exact same way Linux displaced proprietary Unix.
In the server market, right.
Yeah, they want to basically tear out the .docs and .xlsx foundations of the enterprise.
And replace them with what they call a Markdown native agent composable operating system for documents.
Which is a bold claim.
Extremely bold. And before we get into the heavy architecture, which we will because there's a lot to unpack, I want to talk about their visual identity for a second.
Oh, the logo.
Yeah, the logo.
Yeah.
Because I think it perfectly grounds what we're actually talking about today.
It's really distinct.
It is.
Yeah.
It's this vibrant hashtag, but instead of solid lines, it's constructed of these overlapping multicolored pill shapes.
Right, like red, purple, green, yellow.
Yeah, all locked inside a white circle on a blue background. And what's interesting is it deliberately does not look like a piece of paper.
No, not at all.
It visually signals interlocking, composable components. It's basically screaming structured text.
Which perfectly sets up the core provocation of their entire strategy.
Right.
Because if a document needs to be a runtime of interlocking parts for, AI agents to manipulate, the incumbent formats are functionally obsolete.
Obsolete. And the crazy part of the memo is the claim that Microsoft actually already knows this.
Oh, yeah. They know it, but they structurally cannot act on it.
Let's dive into that, this classic innovator's dilemma, because the smoking gun they point to is just fascinating.
What's fascinating here is that Microsoft's own engineers shipped an open source tool called Markdown.
Wait, they shipped it themselves?
Yeah, the internal engineering team. It's basically a one-way converter that takes Office formats and just outputs raw Markdown.
Huh. So the technical talent there clearly recognizes that Markdown is the superior format for modern programmatic workloads.
Especially for feeding data into large language models.
Right. But the product organization is completely trapped.
They are trapped by a $40 billion revenue line.
$40 billion? That's an unassailable war chest.
It is. Office revenue funds roughly a third of Microsoft's operating income.
Wow.
So if they were to natively adopt a Markdown architecture, like if they rewrite Word from the ground up to operate on structured, plain text,
they'd essentially be admitting that their massive installed base is sitting on a deprecated legacy format.
Exactly. It would completely cannibalize their own ecosystem.
It's like asking a major oil company to invent a solar panel that immediately makes all of their own refineries obsolete.
That's a great analogy. Even if the engineering team proves the solar panel is the future,
The CFO is going to kill the project.
right on the spot. So instead, they just keep patching Word.
They duct tape AI onto it.
Right. They duct tape these Copilot features onto the outside of this binary.docs file.
But the financial cost of that duct tape approach is wild. The memo breaks down this concept of version reconciliation.
Yeah, this is where the hidden tax of binary formats really shows up.
Because formats like .docs don't have native semantic versioning. Right?
No, they don't. So enterprises are forced to run version control as a purely human process.
Which we all know is a nightmare. I mean, think about it. Emailing attachments back and forth, digging through SharePoint folders.
Looking for contract final for actually final legal edits.docs.
Exactly. We've all been there.
Anyway.
And the memo calculates that in a 2,000-person enterprise, knowledge workers spend roughly 15 minutes of overhead per document.
Just locating the current version.
Just finding it, verifying where it came from, resolving the conflicting edits.
And when you scale that 15 minutes across a whole year for 2,000 people,
It equates to 25,000 person-hours a year burned,
purely on reconciliation.
which is what, like $2.5 million a year?
Roughly, yeah, per mid-market enterprise, just completely wasted.
And it never shows up on a P&L statement as document versioning waste. It's just smeared across everyone's operational overhead.
Exactly. It's just the cost of doing business right now.
But, yeah, okay, let me play devil's advocate here for a second. Is this really a fatal flaw for Microsoft?
Well, that's the trillion-dollar question.
Right, because they have $40 billion a year. They have Copilot. Can't they just, I don't know, keep patching word, can't they brute force the AI to just understand the binary file eventually?
So brute forcing the AI to read a legacy format works fine for, like, simple summarization tasks.
Okay.
But the workload is fundamentally changing. We are moving from simple reading to autonomous multi-agent orchestration.
Right, where the agents are doing the actual work.
Exactly. And the memo identifies 2026 as this very specific window for disruption because 3 massive macro shifts have suddenly converged.
Making that duct tape approach mathematically unsustainable.
Precisely.
Let's unpack those 3 shifts, because they argue this couldn't happen in 2020, and by 2030 it'll be too late.
Right. The first pillar they talk about is what they call the cognitive substrate.
Cognitive substrate.
Yeah. It basically argues that frontier LLMs natively think in common mark structure.
Ah, okay, because of how they're trained.
Exactly. If you look at the transformers driving these models, they've ingested massive, massive corpora of Markdown formatted text.
Like from GitHub and Stack Overflow.
Yes. So the attention mechanisms within those models have actually developed patterns that are structurally isomorphic to Markdown's hierarchy.
Wait, isomorphic, meaning they map perfectly to each other.
Yes. When an LLM sees a single hash for an H1 heading or, a dash for a list item, that isn't just display formatting to the model.
Like it is in Word.
Right. In Markdown, that character carries massive semantic weight in the vector space.
So Markdown is literally the native data model of the intelligence we are trying to put into the enterprise.
It is. And the memo actually has a fantastic quote about this.
Oh, I remember this, where they talk about the zip file.
Yeah. They say that forcing an LLM to round-trip its thoughts through a zip-archived XML file, which is what a .docs file actually is,
Right.
is the equivalent of making a GPU drive a .matrix printer.
That is such a sharp analogy.
Yeah.
Because you have this incredibly structured, intent-rich output from the model.
And to get it into Word, you have to shove it through this legacy bottleneck.
Which just pollutes the context window with thousands of lines of useless XML formatting tags.
Exactly. It strips away all the semantic intent, the provenance, the structure.
Which brings us to the second shift they talk about, MCP.
The Model Context Protocol.
Yeah. MCP has really emerged over the last 12 months as sort of the USB-C for agents.
That's the perfect way to describe it. It's standardizing how models read and write application state.
Right, because previously, if you wanted an AI to talk to your proprietary app, you had to build a bespoke API integration.
Which was incredibly brittle. But MCP commoditizes that entire integration layer.
So if the model is a commodity, and the plug connecting the model to the app is a commodity, where does the value actually accrue?
Well, the thesis here is that the value gets pushed all the way down the stack.
To the data format itself.
Yes, to the underlying data format and the workflow schema. Because if everyone has the same AI and the same connection protocol, the winner is whoever has the data in a format the AI can manipulate most efficiently.
And most safely, right?
Right, which is the perfect pivot to the third converging shift,
Right.
regulatory pressure.
Oh, yeah. The compliance piece of this is huge.
It really is. Heavy compliance regimes. We're talking SOC2, IPA, the CMMC for defense contractors. They aren't just suggesting better security anymore.
No, they're legally demanding it. They want tamper-evident audit trails.
Exactly. They need to see the exact state of a document and its authorship at every given millisecond.
So if an AI agent goes in and modifies, say, an indemnification clause in a commercial contract,
the compliance officer needs cryptographic proof of exactly which agent made the change, when they made it, and who approved it.
and you just can't do that natively inside a binary XML blob.
You really can't.
Which is why companies buy all that massive middleware, right? Like DocuSign or NetDocuments.
Yeah, that entire middleware industry essentially exists just to compensate for the fact that a .docs document doesn't know its own history.
It's bolting on compliance after the fact.
Right. So if the incumbent architecture is this fragile and broken, we need to look at what MarkdownOffice is actually proposing to replace it with.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Because they call their approach inverting the stack.
Yes. They explicitly state that MarkdownOffice is not a user interface.
Which is counterintuitive for an Office suite.
Right, but the UI is secondary to them. The actual product is an agent runtime environment that just happens to expose an editing surface.
Okay, I want to spend some serious time on this architecture.
Yeah.
Because this is where the engineering gets really heavy.
Let's break it down.
Because if I just open, VS Code and start typing in a raw Markdown file, I haven't magically solved enterprise compliance.
No, not at all.
There has to be a really robust engine underneath. So walk me through their 3 architectural principles. The first one is AST-level operation logs.
Okay, so AST stands for Abstract Syntax Tree.
Right, which most of our listeners will know from compilers parsing code.
Exactly. But MarkdownOffice is applying that foundational computer science concept to business documents.
How does that work in practice?
Well, instead of treating a document as a flat stream of characters, like how Word records an edit as inserting the letter T at offset 4,821.
Right, the character stream approach.
Right. Instead of that, the document is parsed into a tree of semantic nodes.
So a paragraph is a node,
Yeah.
a list is a node, a specific legal clause is a node.
Exactly. And every single edit made to the document is recorded as a structural operation on that specific tree.
So it's an append-only event source log.
You've got it. You aren't really saving a new file when you hit save. You are just appending an operation.
Like insert section parent equals section 4.
Precisely. Which fundamentally changes how AI interacts with the text, leading right into their second principle, LLMs as structured contributors.
Right, because in a standard workflow today, an AI just kind of vomits a paragraph of text into a generic input box.
And a human just hopes it's correct and formatted properly?
Yeah. But in this AST architecture, agents actually emit typed operations against a predefined schema.
Right. They don't just generate generic text, they execute explicit commands.
Like replace clause or annotate for review.
Exactly. The system actually understands the semantic intent of the agent.
Because the operations are typed?
Right. And because they target specific nodes in the syntax tree, we reach the third and really the most critical principle, the validation engine.
Ah, okay. The intermediate representation layer.
Yes, the IR layer that sits right between the storage and the UI. That layer can host incredibly strict programmable compliance rules.
I really love the framing they use for this in the memo. They call it Pydantic for business documents.
It's a brilliant analogy.
Yeah, anyone who writes Python knows Pydantic is this library used for really strict data validation.
And they're taking that exact concept and applying it to enterprise text.
So you can enforce semantic schemas directly on the document itself.
Yes, meaning the document will literally reject an edit if it breaks a predefined rule.
Give me a concrete example of that. Like, how would that work in, say, a hospital?
Okay, think about a clinical trial protocol governed by IPAI.
Okay.
You could write a schema rule stating that protected health information, or PHI, cannot exist outside of very specific tagged subtrees of the document.
Wow. So if an AI agent or even a human doctor tries to move patient data into an unapproved summary section,
The operation just fails. It fails at the AST level. It physically cannot be committed to the log.
that is wild. And because the entire history is this append-only get-compatible log,
Every single operation is cryptographically signed by the author's private key.
whether that author is a human or an AI agent.
Exactly. You get FedRAMP and SOC2 CC7 compliance baked directly into the file format itself.
The document is its own tamper-evident audit record.
Yes. It completely eliminates the need for that entire middleware budget line we talked about earlier.
Okay, the architecture sounds incredibly elegant on a white paper, but, we build systems. We know things that look elegant on paper often fall apart in production.
They absolutely do. We need to stress test this.
So let's do exactly that. Walk me through the concurrency problem.
Ah, concurrency.
Yeah, because Google Docs solved real-time multi-user editing over a decade ago.
Using operational transformation, or OT.
Right, OT. But if MarkdownOffice is constantly appending these structural operations to a tree, how does it handle, say, 5 AI agents and 2 humans trying to rewrite a document at the exact same time?
Doesn't it just create a nightmare of merge conflicts?
Yeah. Doesn't the whole AST log just break?
Actually, it's the reliance on operational transformation that is exactly why Google Docs struggles with multi-agent workloads.
Wait, really? Why?
Because OT operates strictly on character streams. It calculates string indices. So if human A is typing on page 1 and human B is typing on page 5, OT seamlessly shifts all the index numbers in the background to keep everything aligned.
Right. Which works great for human typing speed.
But it is completely catastrophic when you have autonomous agents rewriting entire sections of the document at the speed of compute.
Oh, I see. Because if Agent A deletes a massive section of text on page 2,
All the character offsets for Agent B's edits on page 3 are suddenly invalid.
the indices collide.
Yes. The indices collide and the whole document state crashes into a massive merge conflict.
Because the character stream has no semantic boundaries. It's just one long string.
Precisely. AST-level concurrency completely solves these semantic merge conflicts because the edits are targeting node UIDs, not string indices.
Ah. So if Agent A tightens an indemnity clause in Section 4,
And Agent B adds a carve-out exception to Section 7.
they never conflict at all.
Exactly. They are mutating entirely different branches of the syntax tree. The math doesn't collide.
But wait, what if they do target the exact same node? Like what if Agent A and Agent B both try to rewrite the exact same liability paragraph at the exact same millisecond?
That's where the magic happens. In an OT system, the last millisecond write simply wins, or you get this corrupted, blended string of garbage text.
Right.
But in an AST system, because the operations are strongly typed, the engine actually recognizes the collision on that specific UUID.
So halts it.
Yes. It halts the commit for that specific node and routes it to a human reviewer as a structured diff.
Wow. So it literally says Agent A proposed this subtree modification and Agent B proposed this one. Which branch do you want to merge?
Exactly.
Right.
No current Office suite can express that conflict because they don't know what a subtree is. They only know characters and XML tags.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about garbage collection?
Steep bloat.
Yeah. If you have a 5-year master service agreement, and agents are constantly appending these operations to this Git-like log every day, doesn't the file size just bloat into gigabytes of historical data?
That is a very legitimate engineering hurdle. But the memo outlines a snapshotting mechanism to handle it.
Okay, how does that work?
Periodically, the current tree state is compiled into a base snapshot.
Like a checkpoint.
Right. And all the granular operation logs prior to that snapshot are compressed and archived into cold storage.
So the active runtime only needs to load the current snapshot and the most recent operations.
Exactly. The cryptographic chain of custody is fully maintained in cold storage, but the live memory footprint stays incredibly lightweight.
Okay, so the architecture is defensively sound. I'll give them that.
It's robust.
But, a sound architecture doesn't automatically translate to a defensible business.
No, it doesn't.
I read this, and the skeptic in me immediately thought, isn't this just Notion with better diffs and a compliance pitch?
A lot of people will probably have that initial reaction.
Right, because Notion has blocks, which are basically nodes. Notion has AI integrations. So how is this a real moat that a tech giant can't just cross in a single quarter?
Well, the memo anticipates this exact pushback, and they fiercely defend their thesis by arguing that a true moat isn't a feature.
What is it then?
It is architectural path dependence. And the crown jewel of their defensibility is what they call the semantic diff engine.
Okay, let's dig deep into that. Because a standard get diff on a raw Markdown file is purely syntactic, right?
Yes. If you change a word, Git just tells you line 142 changed.
Which, if I'm a corporate lawyer reviewing a 100-page M&A contract, a syntactic diff is basically useless.
Completely useless.
I don't care that line 142 changed. I need to know what the change actually means for our legal exposure.
And that is the exact problem the semantic diff engine solves.
How does it do it?
MarkdownOffice runs embedding vectors on the AST nodes themselves.
Wait, on the nodes, not the whole document.
Right. Whenever an operation is committed, that specific node is embedded into a high-dimensional vector space.
Okay, I'm following.
So when a user or an agent wants to review changes, they aren't querying line numbers. They execute a query like, which nodes changed by more than 0.3 cosine distance in meaning space?
That is wild. Explain how that actually looks to the end user. Like, what do they see on the screen?
Okay, imagine an agent fixes a typo or changes the word client customer across 50 pages.
Syntactically, that's a massive diff. It touches everything.
Right, but the cosine distance in meaning space is near zero, so the semantic diff engine just ignores it. It folds it away.
Wow.
But if an agent subtly changes the phrase, "will make reasonable efforts to," will guarantee.
Oh man, the meaning space shifts dramatically.
Exactly. The diff engine flags it immediately and tells the user the scope of indemnification was materially narrowed, highlighting the exact structural node.
So the diff operates entirely in meaning space, not text space.
Precisely.
But again, I have to play the skeptic. Why can't Microsoft or Notion just copy this?
That's the logical question.
Microsoft has an absolute army of applied AI researchers.
Yeah.
Couldn't they build a semantic diff algorithm over a weekend and just bolt it onto Word?
They absolutely could build the algorithm in a weekend, but the algorithm itself is not the moat.
Of what is?
The prerequisite to running a semantic diff engine is having a typed abstract syntax tree with stable node identity across commits.
Stable node identity.
Yes. You have to be able to mathematically compare node version 1 and node version 2.
And the .docs architecture, that zip file full of messy XML tags, doesn't have stable node identity.
It doesn't have it at all. It's just a loose collection of tags.
So to support semantic diffs, Microsoft would have to do what?
They would have to completely tear down their entire storage layer and rebuild it from the ground up as a node-based event log.
Which would take years.
The memo estimates that kind of architectural rewrite would take 3 to 5 years internally, but more importantly...
Let me guess. Backward compatibility.
Exactly. Doing so would instantly break backward compatibility for their 400 million paid enterprise seats.
Oh, wow. All the legacy macros, all those bespoke SharePoint plugins that banks use, they would all just instantly break.
They'd be wiped out. So Microsoft is architecturally locked out of their own future by their own success.
That is the ultimate innovator's dilemma. And in the meantime, while Microsoft is trapped, MarkdownOffice scales up.
Right. And as they scale, they train their embedding models on domain-specific corpora.
They start learning the specific vector weights of like complex legal clauses or clinical notes or SEC filings.
Yes. So the quality of the semantic diff improves with every single enterprise deployment.
Which creates a massive data network effect.
Exactly. The leader's lead just widens, protected entirely by those foundational architectural choices they made on day one.
Okay, if the moat is genuinely that deep, we need to do a serious competitive reality check here.
Let's map out the incumbents.
The memo does this, and they really don't pull any punches. I want to run through these giants one by one and interrogate why each one falls short in one specific architectural axis.
Okay, let's start with the monolith. Microsoft Office paired with Copilot.
Right. Obviously, they have an insurmountable distribution mode.
They do, but they have zero architectural moat. As we just discussed, they are trapped. They will continue to ship increasingly impressive Copilot features inside the legacy.docs file.
But they cannot ship a Markdown-native, node-based OS without cannibalizing their ecosystem.
Right. They are literally fighting the future of data structure.
Next up is Google Docs plus Gemini. Now, I think people often underestimate Google in these enterprise scenarios.
They definitely do.
Because Google doesn't have a $40 billion Office revenue line to protect. Google Docs is largely just a loss leader they use to sell workspace seats and cloud storage.
True.
So why couldn't Google just pivot Docs to an AST structure?
The memo acknowledges that Google isn't trapped by the exact same financial dilemma, but Google Docs is burdened by its operational transformation DNA.
Ah, right. The real-time sync engine.
Yeah, the entire sync engine that made Docs famous is fundamentally built on character stream OT. It is basically binary equivalent under the hood.
So it lacks the semantic granularity required for programmatic agent orchestration.
Exactly. And plus, there's the enterprise GTM angle.
Go to market, yeah. Google chronically struggles with top-tier enterprise sales in highly regulated verticals.
Right. Workspace is phenomenal for startups and media companies, but it doesn't have a native compliance story for the document format itself.
Because their SOC2 certification covers Google's cloud infrastructure, not the document.
Exactly. It doesn't provide a cryptographically signed node-level audit trail of the actual file.
And regulated verticals, like fintech and healthcare, are exactly where MarkdownOffice is establishing its beachhead.
Which brings us to Notion.
Yeah, let's talk about Notion. Aesthetically, Notion feels like the closest cousin to what this memo is describing.
It really does.
It's block-based.
Okay.
It has a massive developer following, and they've integrated AI beautifully into the UI. Why doesn't Notion just own this entire space?
Notion has a phenomenal user interface, no question. But under the hood, those blocks are proprietary.
They don't use an open common mark AST.
No, they don't. You cannot simply pipe a standard LLM output directly into a Notion block without passing through their specific API translations.
And what about their version history?
It's incredibly coarse. It takes broad snapshots of the page state. It is not a granular, cryptographically signed event log.
So it's an application feature layer, not an orchestration substrate.
Exactly. Notion's ceiling is the mid-market. They lack the hardcore enterprise compliance infrastructure required to, rip a Fortune 500 legal department away from Microsoft Word.
They're building a great workspace, but they aren't building a secure operating system for documents.
Exactly.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Okay, what about Obsidian? Because I know so many senior engineers who absolutely swear by it.
Oh, developers love Obsidian.
It's natively Markdown, it runs locally, and it has this massive ecosystem of open source plugins.
Obsidian is fantastic, and it actually validates the core premise of the memo, that technical users absolutely love working in raw Markdown. But Obsidian is built strictly for personal knowledge management. It is local first by design.
So there's no real-time multi-user collaboration engine.
Right. No real-time collab, no enterprise governance, no scoped permissions for compliance, and no server-side agent orchestration.
It proves the data format is desired, but it doesn't contest the enterprise collaboration category at all.
Exactly.
Okay, finally, let's look at GitHub itself, because you can store Markdown files in a Git repository today.
You can, yeah.
You get the version control, you get the audit log, you get the open format. That is architecturally pure. Why isn't GitHub the ultimate document OS?
Because the UX is an absolute disaster for 98% of knowledge workers.
Right. I mean, think about a corporate lawyer or a clinical researcher or a VP of finance.
They are not going to open a terminal, initiate a Git pull, manually resolve a merge conflict in a text editor with those head markers.
And then submit a pull request just to update a vendor contract.
It is just never going to happen. The friction is astronomical.
GitHub proves that the underlying primitive version-controlled plain text works perfectly.
But it fails completely to productize that primitive for the non-developer enterprise.
So when you map this whole landscape out, MarkdownOffice sits directly at the intersection of all these missing pieces.
It really does. It has the Markdown native data model of Obsidian,
The enterprise-grade compliance of Innet documents,
the agent orchestration runtime that literally no one else possesses yet,
and a UI layer that bridges the gap between developers and knowledge workers.
Holding all of those axes simultaneously is what defines the category.
But, knowing the architectural weaknesses of the giants is one thing. Actually executing a go-to-market strategy that pries Tier 1 enterprise accounts away from Microsoft.
That is a completely different war.
It really is.
Yeah.
And their strategy for doing this, the open core bet, is where I think this memo takes its absolute biggest risks.
Oh, it is a massive risk. They are deploying a highly specific wedge strategy.
They're aggressively targeting Tier 1 fintechs and Tier 2 legal operations.
Right.
But they are deliberately avoiding Tier 3 healthcare for year one. Why is that?
Primarily because of the HITRI-Rust certification overhead. They need a momentum and velocity early on.
And spending 12 months grinding through healthcare compliance audits before they can sign their very first customer would just kill the startup.
Precisely. Velocity is everything. So to achieve it, they outline this 3 pincers go-to-market motion.
Let's walk through the pincers. The first one is bottom-up, developer-led adoption.
Right. They are open sourcing the core AST engine and the CLI under an Apache 2.0 license.
And they're shipping a free VS Code expansion.
Yes. The theory is that software engineers who already live in Markdown and Git will adopt it organically for their internal workflows.
Like for their RFCs, their technical architecture specs, and their infinite runbooks.
Exactly. They will adopt it individually the exact same way they adopted tools like Obsidian or, early Slack, long before corporate IT even knows it exists.
Because the cognitive onboarding cost for an engineer is near zero. They don't have to learn a new paradigm.
Right. And then the trap is set.
The trap, I love that. How does the trap spring?
Well, when the compliance team or the legal ops team at that fintech company inevitably starts searching for document governance tooling to manage AI workflows.
The engineering team champions MarkdownOffice from the inside.
Exactly, which sets up the second pincer, top-down compliance sales.
So when the sales team gets that warm introduction from engineering, they aren't walking into the CISO's office pitching a slightly better text editor.
Because that is a losing pitch.
Right. They go in and say, we can consolidate your infrastructure. We can replace your version control middleware, your audit logging vendor, and your AI governance platform with one single secure document format.
It is a massive infrastructure consolidation play. just disguised as a document editor.
And the third pincer is the MCP marketplace.
Yes. By positioning MarkdownOffice as a first-party context server on major LLM platforms like Anthropic and OpenAI,
They aim to generate free inbound pipeline.
right. Whenever an enterprise deploys an AI agent and needs a secure, compliant way to let that agent read and write internal documents, MarkdownOffice is just waiting there at the end of that MCP standard.
Okay, I have to stop here and inject some serious reality into this plan,
Go for it.
because the bottom-up open core pipeline sounds amazing in a slide deck.
And it always does.
But we have seen so many developer tools fail to make the jump from loved by engineers to purchased by compliance.
It's the hardest chasm to cross.
The memo aims for a 0.3% conversion rate from free open source users to paid enterprise seats.
Which is incredibly aggressive.
Extremely aggressive. They admit themselves that historical conversion rates for open core tools often hover between 0.1% and 1%, with a downside risk of 0.05%.
Right.
If their conversion rate hits that 0.05% downside, the customer acquisition math completely breaks and the company burns through its runway in like 18 months.
It is the single most critical point of failure in the business model. But to their credit, the founders don't hide from it.
No, they have a contingency plan.
A very specific, somewhat ruthless contingency plan. They recognize that a compliance officer isn't going to authorize a massive enterprise software purchase just because the engineering team likes the UI.
The trigger for an enterprise conversion is almost always a negative event.
Exactly, a compliance incident.
An incredibly stressful M&A audit, where the legal team couldn't prove the provenance of a critical contract.
Or a regulatory exam where the company was just fined for poor AI data governance.
So how do they capitalize on that?
They instrument the open source product to monitor for proxy signals of these exact events.
Oh, wow. Like telemetry.
Yes. If an organization utilizing the free tier suddenly starts mass exporting cryptographic audit logs or running deep semantic diff queries across hundreds of legal nodes in a single day,
The system flags it.
right. That is the exact moment the direct sales team swoops in, because the organization is clearly in the middle of a painful audit or an incident.
That is brilliant, but also kind of terrifying.
Yeah.
But what if the bottom-up engine just stalls entirely? What if they don't get the GitHub stars and developer adoption plateaus before it reaches critical mass?
The contingency for that is a hard pivot.
A pivot away from open source.
Essentially, yes. If the open source adoption doesn't generate the necessary top-of-funnel volume within the first 4 quarters, they will abandon the reliance on bottom-up product-led growth.
And pivot entirely into a traditional high-CAC direct sales motion targeting CISOs.
Exactly. In that scenario, the open source project is basically demoted to purely marketing material.
Just proof of concept to show security teams rather than the primary distribution channel.
Right. It's a brutal reality check on the dream of open source business models.
It really is. But let's assume they throw the needle.
Let's assume they survive the GTM gauntlet.
Right. They balance developer love with CISO requirements, and they actually start tearing out Microsoft Office seats in Tier 1 fintechs. What is the ultimate end game?
The end game is the load-bearing analogy of the entire document, the Linux analogy.
They're looking at a 10-year horizon aiming for 2035.
Yes. They envision a world where binary formats like .docs occupy the exact same niche that WordPerfect occupied in 2010.
It becomes a legacy artifact you only find on the hard drives of retirees or like incredibly antiquated state government offices.
Exactly. They want to become the invisible underlying infrastructure for all enterprise knowledge.
And the core thesis relies on this specific historical parallel, right? MarkdownOffice is to enterprise documents what Linux was to server infrastructure.
Right. Linux didn't win the server wars because it had a more intuitive user interface than proprietary Unix or Windows Server.
No, it won because its architecture was fundamentally structurally correct for the next generation of workloads.
And at that time, the new workload was networked internet services running on commodity by 86 hardware.
The proprietary incumbents, with their heavy monolithic architectures, simply couldn't adapt quickly enough to that new reality.
Exactly. And the argument here is that the new workload today is not human typing.
It's the agent-orchestrated, semantically versioned data pipeline.
Yes. The document is no longer a static artifact printed on A4 paper. It is a stateful runtime environment.
Let's interrogate this analogy honestly, though,
Right.
because the transition to Linux wasn't an overnight revolution.
No, it took 15 long years of grueling hand-to-hand combat in the data center to become the default standard.
Right. So what forcing functions exist today that could possibly compress that timeline for MarkdownOffice? And conversely, what is the existential threat that stalls it out entirely?
Okay, the memo identifies two massive forcing functions acting simultaneously to compress the adoption timeline.
The first one is unrelenting regulatory pressure.
Yes. In the late 90s, no federal agency was legally mandating that corporations switch their web servers to Linux.
But today, compliance frameworks are effectively mandating the exact kind of cryptographic, node-level auditability that only an AST-based architecture can natively provide.
The government is essentially forcing the transition.
And the second forcing function is the explosive proliferation of AI agents.
Right. Every Fortune 500 company is currently trying to deploy agents to reduce operational costs.
And when they realize those agents hallucinate or break because they're trying to parse zip-archived XML.
The pain point becomes acute immediately.
But there is a massive risk they openly admit in the memo, and I want to make sure we cover this.
The existential threat.
Yeah. What happens if agent orchestration becomes completely commoditized across any format?
Right. What if a well-funded competitor, say OpenAI or Anthropic, builds an integration layer so staggeringly intelligent that it can perfectly parse, edit, and orchestrate workflows inside a messy legacy .docs file without ever losing semantic intent?
Right. If the AI gets that good at dealing with legacy garbage, if it can flawlessly translate the dot matrix printer into a GPU, to use their own analogy, then the underlying data format doesn't actually need to change.
The enterprise can just keep using Word, and the superintelligent agent will handle the translation layer invisibly in the background?
Doesn't their entire Markdown native advantage just evaporate in that scenario?
It absolutely does. If the AI can normalize the data perfectly, the format is irrelevant.
So how do they mitigate that?
The memo's mitigation strategy for this is to lean even harder into the semantic diff engine and the strict typed schemas.
Oh, yeah.
They argue that even a superintelligent AI cannot mathematically perform a true semantic diff on a format that lacks stable node identity.
Because the nodes just don't exist in the file format.
Right. The moats they are building are architecturally unreachable from a binary baseline, regardless of how smart the AI interacting with it is.
So the AI might be able to read the document perfectly.
But the document still can't cryptographically prove its own history without the AST layer.
That makes a lot of sense. It paints such a vivid, compelling picture of what a corporate workflow could look like in 2035.
It really does.
I mean, imagine a chief financial officer querying a master M&A contract during a really stressful acquisition.
Right. They don't want to read a 200-page redline document generated by external lawyers.
And they definitely don't want to dig through endless email threads. They just open a terminal or a chat interface and find out exactly what indemnity concessions were made between the term sheet signing and today.
And because the document is an AST log, the system doesn't just do a keyword search.
No. In 3 seconds, it returns a cryptographically guaranteed structured diff in meaning space.
It shows the CFO the exact shift in legal exposure, mapped against the corporate schema, validated by the compliance engine.
With a cryptographic signature proving exactly which external legal agent made the change.
That is no longer a document. That is an operating system for institutional knowledge.
And that is exactly why this is an infrastructure play, not an application feature.
Completely agree.
You know, we started this deep dive talking about the technical debt we willingly accept in our workflows.
Yeah.
You build production systems for a living. You demand CI/CD pipelines. You demand Git. You demand structured databases.
Right.
So why are you still piping your most advanced, computationally expensive AI models through binary office formats from 1995?
It's a complete paradigm mismatch.
It is a mismatch that cannot survive the decade. But, you know, looking at this architecture, it leaves us with a really profound implication to mull over.
Yeah, it does. If the document truly becomes an operating system and AI agents become the primary users doing the drafting, the schema validation, the semantic redlining, and the cross-referencing,
What happens to the human author?
that is the real question hiding at the bottom of all this technology.
Do we stop being writers entirely? If the agents are generating the semantic nodes and managing the syntax tree?
Do humans just become the final commit approvers of our own thoughts?
Yep. A profound question for 2035. Take that back to your engineering teams. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We'll see you next time.